time, just hit go live immediately once you've written up. I'll go ahead and start letting people in the meantime.
So I see the two of you plus two other people's names. Am I going to see more? Because it's like starting to cover up my screen.
Yes, and you can actually, Mandy, go to the top right corner.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so if you go to the thing, you can just change your display to whatever works for you.
Got it. Got it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Tracy, let me know when the Facebook thing goes live.
So the I no longer have the, oh no, I think it is live at this point because it says stop live stream.
Yeah, so it's then it should be live. Let me double check on.
Yes.
Yes, we are live.
We are live.
Right. We are in business. Thank you, Tracy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tracy, I'm going to hand off the letting people in back to you, and I will go back to my my little screen. We really appreciate you joining us this evening we've been working on the railroad, our event for tonight, virtual event for tonight. My name is Anjali Zutshi. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. Some of you are regulars to our monthly virtual events, and some of you are new to us today for this particular special presentation. But we're glad that you've stopped by either way. And our hope is that through these events, you will get to know more about the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission and about our mission as a partner to the state agency, the Texas Historical Commission, our mission to support the THC and its preservation efforts across the state. You can get involved with these efforts if you so choose by checking out our What We Do page on our website at thcfriends.org. If you're on social media, you can follow us on Facebook at THC Friends and on Instagram at friends_THC. We are also on LinkedIn. And we are, as you heard Tracy and me talk just a minute ago, we are also broadcasting live on Facebook, and we'll share the link with everyone that has been registered for this event tomorrow, so that you can watch it again, or if you want to share that link with other folks who might be interested, please feel free to do it. While this monthly programming is free, many of you choose to support us through these events, and we are very, very, very grateful for that. We really appreciate your support. It allows us to provide programming like this on a regular basis, and we hope that you continue to enjoy the content that we share. I think we have some THC commissioners that have joined us, Friends board members. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining, taking time out this evening and spending that with us. Before we get started, I wanted to share some information about our upcoming programs for the rest of this year. We have two programs for 2024 that we will be offering in November and December. They're both holiday focused. November 14th, you can watch Buttermilk Pie, a slice of Black culinary heritage, presented by Natalie Wright Moore Clark, who is a food historian and a chef. On December 12th, we will have Madeline Van Lonen, site educator at the Charles and Marianne Goodnight State Historic Site in Amarillo or near Amarillo. She will be presenting Home for the Holidays at Goodnight Ranch, Cultivating Community at the Dinner Table and Beyond. Please do join us for these two events coming up in November and December. You can register for these on our website as well. And again, before we get started, a few housekeeping items. We would really appreciate it if you can keep your mics on mute, but if you have a question, please drop the question in the chat box. At the end of Mandy's presentation, we will we'll ask you to open your mics up if you want and ask the question yourself, or you can continue dropping them in the chat box. Between Tracy and I, we will pass those questions on to Mandy, and she will answer them. If you have any thoughts, comments, please share on the chat as well. Memories, I have several related to railroads that I can think of. So please share those stories and memories if you have any. It's always fun to hear from our audience as well. Like I mentioned, tomorrow morning or sometime tomorrow, everyone that has registered for this program will receive an email with a link to the recording of this event. And if our presenter tonight has any resources to share, that we will share those in the email as well. So with that, it is now my privilege and honor to introduce our presenter for this evening. Mandy Lockaby has worked for the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway as a conductor since 2013. Over the course of her employment, she has earned an associate's degree in business and is currently completing her bachelor's degree in operations management for logistics and transportation. Mandy serves on the executive board for the Slayton Harvey House, where she gets to share her love for the railroad with some of the most amazing people, working together to preserve an important part of West Texas Railroad history. Her husband also works for the railroad as an engineer, and they are Slayton's first ever husband and wife train crew, which makes them the love train when they get to work together. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Mandy herself. So with that, Mandy, thank you so much for taking time to join us for this this presentation, for sharing your story and your experience with us. And over to you.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining me tonight and allowing me to share these 15 stories of amazing women and the work that they've done that's helped shape and transform the railroad over the last 170 years. And I'm so thankful to the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission for allowing this platform to share this story and to be able to be doing it live from the Slayton Harvey House, where one of our stories actually takes place, but we'll get back to that in just a minute. As Anjali said, my name is Mandy. I just celebrated my 11th year as a freight conductor for BNSF Railways, and I serve on the executive board here at the Slayton Harvey House. And a few years ago, I was asked to do a presentation about women or being a woman on the railroad, and I really didn't know what I was going to talk about. To me, it's not all that exciting. And I asked them how long the presentation needed to be, and they said an hour. So my mom used to call me Mouth of the South, but I knew that I couldn't fill an hour talking about myself. So I started doing some research and pretty much expected to find the roles that women filled when men went away to war. And there was plenty of that. But what I wasn't expecting was basically what I found, that women were innovators and trailblazers for the railroad. So the challenge then became, which women do I talk about? And then how do I present it in a meaningful way? So what I came up with was to do it in chronological order by date, because I feel like it kind of sets the stage for not just the women, but what the time was like when they were doing these amazing things. And I think it kind of really underscores the magnitude of what they did. So just a few dates to keep in mind before we get started. The Transcontinental Railroad, which is basically it's a rail line from the coast, the West Coast to Middle America. That was completed in 1869. Then the 19th Amendment is what gave women the right to vote, and that wasn't ratified until 1920. And then it wasn't until 1964 that through the Civil Rights Act, women were offered the opportunity for equal right or equal opportunity employment. So we've got about 100 years there where women were really fighting to be seen and to be heard. So with that, I wanted to start off with a quote from Sojourner Truth. Sojourner was a slave, and she escaped slavery in 1826. And when she did, she took her horrific past and turned it into such a powerful tool. She is the epitome of courage and of strength. And she became an abolitionist for slavery and an advocate for women's rights. And she was asked to speak at a women's rights convention in 1851 at an Ohio women's rights convention. And it's a very important speech that she gave in American history. And in it, she's quoted, "If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. Now they is asking to do it, and the men better let them." And I just felt that really just exemplified just the spirit that these women had and the tenacity that we're going to see come from some of them. So let's see what we come up with here. The first lady, I do have slides to go with everybody but Susan, but she's still worth bringing up. Susan Morningstar is on record as having been one of the first women that worked for a railroad, which was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. So if you've played Monopoly recently and landed on the B&O Railroad, you were in good company with Susan. Her main job was to tend to the passenger cars, keep them tidy, keep them clean. Passengers were mostly men at this time in 1855. And they were allowed to smoke cigars and drink whiskey and be kind of surly. And it just wasn't a very friendly, warm environment for female travelers. So when Susan started taking care of business, she wanted to, put some of her own personal touches into the car. And it could be as simple as placing a doily there to kind of warm it up, give it a little homey feel. Well, what happened was women started traveling more. They felt more comfortable with it. So her placing her homey touches actually opened up an entire demographic for the B&O Railroad to start marketing their ticket sales to. So I think the moral of Susan's story is to never underestimate the power of a properly placed doily. Then the next fearless ladies I'd like to talk about are the waiter carriers. They are also known as the fried chicken ladies. So traveling by rail was relatively new at this time, and some of the amenities were, still coming along. So there was not a dining car at this time. So what would happen is the trains would have to stop in towns across America for their passengers to stop and eat food. If you didn't pack enough lunch to sustain the entire journey, you would find yourself lucky to stop through Gordonsville, Virginia, where the fried chicken ladies would be cooking up their goods and serving them directly on the platforms at the depot. Now, again, this is back in a time where women were not seen as equal and were fighting for their rights to be seen as such. Well, it was even more challenging for the Black women of America. So when these women started engaging in commerce and open marketplace here on a platform, it wasn't widely or well received by a lot of the city councilmen and other people. So they banned the chicken ladies and said they couldn't sell their products on the platform anymore. Well, refusing to be marginalized or limiting their success, these brave women moved their business directly out into the active rail yards right by the main line, bringing their goods right to the passengers. This was something that the councilmen really couldn't control. The entrepreneurial spirit of these women was pretty fierce. They were able to provide for themselves and establish a successful business on the backs of an industry that all but turned its back on them I mean, it wouldn't let them travel freely and wouldn't let them be employed. So the fact that they were able to do this was really, really an amazing accomplishment. So, you know, although their story kind of had an ending after a few years with the invention of the dining car, their story doesn't die on the history pages. Gordonsville, Virginia does celebrate them every year with a fried chicken lady festival, bringing them back to life. So I think that's really awesome. And I hope that I can attend and taste some of that fried chicken one day. Next up, we have Eliza Dexter Murphy. So in 1870, she actually improved the bearings on the wheels of the rail cars. So what we're going to look at here, if you see the pink arrow, there's actually 3 nuts in a triangular shape there in the middle circle. That is the journal. So the actual purpose of the journal is to support the whole weight of the train, but to allow the axles to spin freely and smoothly. So what she did was she came up with a design based off of some of the horrific accidents that she had witnessed. Back when the Transcon was first built, the trains were much smaller. They were maybe a locomotive and a couple of cars, and they would only go a short distance. Well, as they continued to lay more and more track across America, the trips became longer and more continuous. Well, the rail equipment just wasn't designed to keep up with the wear and the tear. And what would happen is the axles would seize up, which would cause a derailment, which would result in loss of life. So if we just pause for just a second and think back to last year in 2023 in East Palestine, Ohio, the derailment that was caused there was actually noted by the National Transportation Safety Board as having been a result of a faulty bearing there inside the journal. So it's a very, very important piece of our equipment and what we're supposed to inspect and things. So just so you can kind of understand how important that piece is. But we'll go back to 1870 with Eliza. What she discovered was the only thing that was providing lubrication to the wheels was actually a rag that was soaked in oil and stuffed inside that journal box. Well, as the wheels turn quickly, the friction builds up and becomes hot, and the rags would just burn up and disintegrate, which would leave opportunity for those axles to seize up. So what she did was got a patent in 1870 for basically like a sheet of leather that she would make, and she would score it using some sort of machinery with circular saws so that the top would be felted, and then she would put lubricating powder on the top of it. She would put it in a machine between 2 rollers to press that powder into the leather, kind of making it one solid piece. Then she would dip it in some kind of rubber or paraffin or tallow and would apply something fibrous to the top. It could be burnt hair, it could be sawdust or asbestos, any kind of fibrous material. She put it on top of that tallow or paraffin, run it through the rollers again, and it would form a very hard surface that became highly polished, which functioned very well as an effective bearing. And she would actually layer these sheets of leather on one on top of the other inside the journal box. And that was essentially the bearings. Well, she went on later to receive 16 patents for her life-saving device. And I, for one, am pretty excited that she figured that out, you know, because we've seen the devastation that can happen as a result of a bad bearing. So the next group of women I'd like to talk about are pretty special to me. They are the Harvey girls. They are like the all-female workforce operating restaurants serving the railroad. Again, I'm coming to you from the Slayton Harvey House, which is a Fred Harvey eating house that was established in 1912. So it's really a big honor to be able to be here. But we can't really talk about the Harvey girls until we kind of introduce you to Mr. Harvey himself. So for those who don't know, Harvey Fred Harvey was an English immigrant who came over and is kind of credited for being the first chain restaurant in America, maybe even the first fast food, if you will. He positioned his eating houses about every 130 miles or so along the Santa Fe line. As you can see on this map, every black dot represents a eating house at that time, from Chicago to the West Coast, all the way down to Galveston. So he was pretty excited and aggressive at making sure his business was getting put along the rail lines. Of course, that's Mr. Harvey there on the top left. And on the bottom left, that's the Slayton Harvey house. And I'm actually in that top window on the far right now. There's the rail yard behind us. So Mr. Harvey had really exquisite taste, and he really wanted to make an excellent, high quality experience for his passengers that came through, as well as the rail crews. So instead of just providing hot coffee and pastries, he would also have things like salmon, roasted veal, in some cases lobster. So it's really like a fine dining opportunity when you came through. But he knew that no matter how well positioned his houses were or how great the lobster was, none of it was going to matter if he didn't have a high quality means to deliver that. So that's where the Harvey girls come in. He would send out an advertisement to have Harvey girls come from all over the United States to come and work at his establishments. He would pay them a fair wage and would put them up here at the Harvey house where they could stay. And it was kind of like a college dormitory of sorts. The girls would stay that way as trains would come throughout the evening. There would be somebody here to receive them and to take care of them. So the thing is, you have to think about, like, they were young women back in the 1870s. They didn't have the right or the ability to Google, what does it look like over here? They just had to be fearless and be willing to pack a bag and set out for a wild adventure into the Wild West, which must have been terrifying, but they did. And he was such a good employer to women, actually, and we'll go into some more about that after in just a little bit. But the women were expected to be unmarried between the ages of 18 and 30, educated to at least an 8th grade level, and to be of high moral character. He just wanted everything to be at the highest level for his customers when they came through. Once they were a Harvey girl, they had to wear, as you can see in the picture here, their famous black and white uniform. I have one back here beside me. Had to be pressed and sharp and ready to go at all times. And he also really frowned upon fraternization and flirting with the passengers or the rail workers. But as we know, life has a funny way of taking over, and love does too. And these women not only found Wild West adventures, they found marriages and had stories for the rest of their lives to tell. So these fearless women raised the bar for Fred Harvey and his dream and elevated his service level, making it appealing for travelers all across America. And their contribution didn't end there. It actually inspired MGM Studios to make a movie called, appropriately, The Harvey Girls, starring none other than Judy Garland. And it's really a cute little musical. If you've never had a chance to see it and you don't mind musicals, it's funny, it's cute. I encourage you to give it a go. Next, we have Mary Elizabeth Walton. So in 1879, she invented an emissions deflection system and actually a noise reduction system. So Mary was a boarding house owner in New York City. And at the time, this was when the Industrial Revolution was coming to America. So there's large buildings, lots of people. The more people that come, the more pollution there is. There's kerosene and oil refineries, fertilizer plants, trains, everything. So when she moved to New York City, the last thing she envisioned was having the windows open on her middle floor apartment house and having the smoke pour in every time the L train would go by. So what she decided to do was create something that would take in all of those pollutants. So in 1879, actually October 6th, 1879, Mary invented a deflection system that would force they would attach this chimney looking device to the firebox on the locomotive. And it has a cap on top and then a hole in the bottom that would have a tube in it that would run down into a water tank. So the smoke and the vapors and the nastiness would go into this chimney, down through the tube, down into the water where it would kind of get cooled, allowing the pollutants to become heavy so that they could fall into the water. And then the water would then be emptied into the city's water sewage system. So it actually was something really productive for not just the city of New York, but the officials in Great Britain actually caught wind of this. And she went overseas and was able to sell her device to England, which had just experienced the Great London Fog, which, if you know, it was actually fog that timed perfectly with a very toxic level of pollution in the air. The fog kept the pollution down low and created a lot of tragedy and a lot of loss of life for the residents of London. So this was something was, extra special to them, and she was touted as having developed the what is it that they said, the best invention of this age. So this was something that was really special and really important across the world. But she didn't stop there. And this is probably my favorite story of Mary's. So as we talked about, she lived in, the apartment building, and the L trains, which is short, it's EL, not the letter L, but it's short for elevated trains. So they're on these great big tall wooden structures. And, they may be 10 stories in the air. It might be right by your bedroom window, which would be awful. But, when they would come around the corners, they would make this awful screeching sound. So the residents of New York went to the city, and they were exhausted, just, beleaguered mobs of tired people complaining that they're not able to sleep. So the city called in Thomas Edison to come up with an invention to take care of this noise problem. Well, 6 months go by, and Thomas Edison returns back to the city council, and he has nothing. He was empty-handed. He really couldn't come up with anything. Well, Mary wasn't just going to stand by and not let anything happen. So she stepped out and went on train rides for 3 days, to the point where conductors were starting to kick her off the trains and platforms. They'd had enough. She would lay down on the platform and look and listen and feel every vibration. And if you can imagine a woman in a bustled up dress laying on the ground in a platform in a depot, it must have been a sight. Well, she would make her notes, would go back to her apartment building, down into her basement, where she had actually built a model train set, tested her theory, and what she found out was it was the wooden structure itself that was amplifying the noise and sending out extra vibrations. So she developed, in February 8th, 1881 is when she got this patent for basically a cradle. And it's very primitive. It's mind-boggling that Thomas Edison couldn't come up with this, but it's a wooden box that was lined with cotton, filled with sand, and dipped in tar to make it weatherproof. And they would mount it up underneath the actual rail on the corners and the edges of the turns, the curves, that would reduce the noise problems that there was in New York City. So her invention was sold to the New York City Metro Rail for $10,000, which again, in 1881, that's a lot of money. So she got it for $10,000, was given a royalty forever on her patent, and was noted as having gone where no man had gone before. And not only did she go where no man had gone before, she succeeded where Thomas Edison had failed. And so today, Mary Elizabeth Walton is recognized in our education system through the STEM program, which is the science, technology, engineering, and math, as a female role model. So I think that's pretty impressive for old Mary. Then we have Nancy Wilkerson. In 1881, she helped invent and improve the railroad cattle car. Now, We don't have these anymore, but at the time, this was a reasonable means to transport cattle from one place to another. And now the picture here from her patent looks rather simple in theory. Let's see, go to the next one. I tried to find a picture after reading her patent that kind of mimicked exactly what the patent said, and I feel like this does it quite well. What she did is she employed the use of sliding partitions. That way they could take the partitions out and not only use the car for livestock, but also for freight. So now it maximizes the potential of that singular car. She made it where all the cattle would be loaded facing the locomotives. So it was safer for the employees who had to manage the livestock, but it also kept the cows from hooking each other with their horns. And if you can look at the picture, you'll see these branch pipes that are dropping down from the ceiling down to the side. There was actually a system of pipes that went along the top of the rail car that they would use to fill with water from hoses from the ground. And the water would drop down those branch pipes with using gravity. So it would be like an instantaneous way to water these animals and to feed them as well. So it was just a really safe way. So the employees weren't having to maneuver through the car. They were walking along the top, hopefully while it wasn't moving, but I don't know how the safety standards were then. I know how they are now, but we don't use these cars today. It's really not an efficient means of travel for the livestock now. It's a pretty costly adventure to do it through the railroad. Meat producers have located themselves pretty centrally to the packing plants, kind of limiting and reducing the need for long haul solutions. So that's pretty much a business gone over to the trucking company. You've seen them on the highways, but it was something that the railroad did. And Nancy was a farmer's daughter and just decided she was going to fix a problem that she thought existed for her. So, I mean, we saw a woman who fixed a big city problem, and now we've seen a problem being fixed in middle America. I mean, it's like, it's an awesome story. Okay. Mary Riggin in 1890 is the inventor of the crossing gate. So this is something that we see and we still use to this day. So, in the later part of the 19th century, transportation was really becoming a big deal. And it was more a matter of a race to who was going to be the first to build something, the biggest something, the fastest something. But the safest was really kind of never on the menu, I guess. It wasn't really a topic discussed, safety. And as trains were coming through, more and more towns were building up and trains were coming through. There were just more and more incidents between passengers or pedestrians, and horse-drawn buggies, other animals, other trains. So she had seen and witnessed an accident, and it was something that just really impacted her and changed her opinion and her attitude, and knew this was something she needed to act upon. So it's a little bit of a primitive look. It's a wooden gate that is operated by pulleys and counterweights, and she actually had a bell that would ding. Now, there had to be a human that operated these, of course, but thankfully so they did. And we still use a much more improved version of these today. So, I get the privilege to talk to scout groups and students at schools, and my presentations for them are usually, well, they're a lot different than this, but they're usually geared towards rail safety and things like that. And it's always important for me to give them a little speech. And so I'd like to give it to you, the adults today. If you're running late, don't try to race the train. It's not a recipe for a winning competition. It will only end in disaster. I've been in several incidents from someone who made a choice for their life to people who just weren't paying attention good enough. And there we met at the crossing. Your kids are watching your behaviors, your driving patterns and habits right now. And when they become that newly licensed teenager, I don't want to meet them at a crossing. So just remember, if the gates are down, don't go around. Mrs. Riggin went through a lot to come up with this invention. It's important enough that we still use it today. So I encourage you all to just wait a minute, the train will pass. Next, we have Sarah Kidder. She is the first female president of a railroad in the world. So Sarah was a housewife. Her husband, John, he ran a railroad. He was also a bridge builder. So he built the bridges the railroads went across. It was a pretty much brilliant business plan for himself. Well, he ended up passing away, and he left his entire railroad to his wife, who again was a housewife. So the board voted her in, I guess, because John wanted it that way, but they were a little reluctant, of course. What would she know about running a railroad? Well, at the time, the locomotives were all wood burning locomotives. So they were a little, behind the times because technology was advancing. And because of that, there were actually other railroads that wanted to come in and buy up her territory. And the first time that some investors came along, the board was almost certain that she would jump at the opportunity to sell the business because they just assumed it was too overwhelming for her. And she flat out turned them down, which left them pretty shocked. That same set of investors came back a few years later, and she quoted them a number that was said to have been astronomical, so because she knew they couldn't afford it, and they finally walked away, refusing to deal with the crazy lady. Well, finally, she converted her fleet from wood burning locomotives to the new crude oil burning locomotives and was out soliciting for business because competition clearly was getting pretty steep. Everybody wanted her territory, where she ended up going in to business with PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, where they built the Lake Spalding Dam, and she supplied the sand, and she was the sole supplier of the sand and gravel for the dam project and other hydroelectric projects for that. So not only did business resume after her husband's passing, it flourished. She was thriving. So it's the San Francisco Bulletin ran an article that said, "Woman runs the road," where they're quoted saying, "Few railroads anywhere revel in a dividend of 10%. But what makes this one really remarkable is the fact that it was unearned under the direction of a woman, the only woman in all the world who is an active steam railroad president." So Sarah did eventually sell the company. She sold her shares, resigned as president, the board resigned. And at the time of her resignation, her shares were valued at $500,000 at that time, which is an estimated 14 million in today's dollars. So not bad for a housewife. Okay. I think I hit the back button. No. All right, Dr. Mary Ingle Pennington is up next, and she is credited for inventing or improving, but also inventing the refrigerated rail car. So thanks to her, you're able to enjoy that big bowl of Bluebell ice cream in the evenings because it came to you via train at some point. So we've talked about how the Industrial Revolution brought all these people to the bigger cities, but we haven't really thought about the impact that has had. What happened then is a lot of the smaller communities became less dependent upon local grocers and gardens. They were getting their food from across the country. So as more people moved to the big cities, it made it very difficult for them to have access to a lot of good food. Well, Mary was going to college at the University of Pennsylvania in 1892, where she was trying to get her degree in chemistry. But, because she was a woman, the university made the decision that she really didn't need a degree, but they allowed her to earn her certificate of proficiency in chemistry. Well, she was able to continue on to prove herself worthy of earning a degree. And a few years later, she went to the same university, earning her PhD in chemistry. Well, shortly thereafter, she went to work for the Department of Agriculture, which we all now know as the FDA, where she served as a chief of its food research lab in 1908 for bacterial contamination in food. So understanding that the need for food to be properly stored at the right temperature in order to make it from Middle America to the coastline was really important. As you can see here, this is a scary picture at least. You know, it's hanging pork with just ice on top. And I can't even imagine, I don't even want to imagine what that must have been like. Well, at the time, there were 40,000 of these cars. And Mary spent a lot of time, she rode the rails over 500 times studying each of these cars. And what she found out was only 3,000 of them actually met the standards for keeping the food safe. And that's 7.5% of the whole fleet was of operating status. That's terrifying. So what she decided to do was she invented the refrigerated car. We still use these today. We call them reefer, short for refrigerated cars. What this is, it's a series of pipes in the walls of the insulated car. There's some pipes that have steam in them. All the pipes are connected to like an inlet blower. And so when the steam pushes itself out, the inlet blower moves it around the car while the coolant and the frozen parts can freeze that steam and disperse that cooling all over the car and really keep all of the food safe and frozen so we can enjoy that bluebell when it arrives. So not only did her invention protect the food and America's food security, it actually opened up an entirely new marketplace as farmers and livestock growers were able to reach, oh, there's a train, were able to reach out and send their goods to other states, all the way out to the coast. And it developed a whole new system of commerce. And that was an amazing accomplishment for her too. And there was an article in 1941 in the New Yorker where she was profiled as the Ice Woman. And I think that's a title that would probably incite most women, but for her, it was an incredible badge of honor. So we owe a lot to her for protecting our bluebell ice cream. Next up, we have Miss Mary Coulter, who worked for Fred Harvey. Again, like I said, he was an advocate for employing women, not so much as using them, but really valuing what they brought to him, to the business. So when Mary came out of college, there were 8,000 architects, only 22 of which were women. So she really is a pioneer of being a woman in a man's world. It was noted in an article that Coulter was a chain-smoking, Stetson-wearing dynamo, a tough-minded woman in a man's world who knew how to negotiate for and insist on what was important to her. So I'd like to think that if Mary were still around, we could be good friends over a nice glass of whiskey. But Mary worked for Fred Harvey, and she designed a lot of his eating houses and hotels. I believe it was 23 of them at the time when she worked. She didn't do all of them, but there was 23 of them that she did do. She had a great affinity for the Southwest and the Southwestern motif and the colors and the cultural representation that it had. And so she employed that design throughout, whether it was the interior design or the actual architectural component of the Harvey houses themselves. Well, after working for Mr. Harvey for several years, Fred Harvey and Santa Fe Rail got together and collaborated and wanted to build a train station in Kansas City, Union Station. And Mary was the one who received the honor of getting to build that. At the time, the project began in 1913, cost a staggering $7 million, making it the third largest train station in the United States that was used by over 14 railroads and was, seen by thousands and still is seen by thousands of travelers every day. And here you can see on the left just a rendering of what the grand lobby looks like in Union Station. But off to the right, you can see the actual photograph of what it looks like. it is a bit of a departure from her normal Southwestern, more humble type design, but this was a palatial building. It had columns, big chandeliers, marble floors. So she really got to go into a whole new world with creating this one. So what an amazing accomplishment for a woman of 22 women out of 8,000 architects to receive the honor of building. And next we have Miss Olive Dennis. In 1920, she was the first service engineer for the B&O Railroad. So we met Susan Morningstar earlier with her doily on the B&O, and here they've hired Olive Dennis. Now, again, 1920 is also when the 19th Amendment was ratified. So when the B&O hired her, it was a little less for her skill set and more for her being a woman. Who better to usher in an era for women than a woman? Olive graduated from Cornell University. She was only the second woman to receive a degree in civil engineering. So on the railroad, when we talk about engineers, we think of the frumpy old man in the striped overalls with the little hat. Well, in this case, this was about mathematics, science, and engines and machinery, you know, those kinds of things. So she was a completely different kind of engineer. But what they wanted to do, the B&O, they wanted to usher in a whole new era for women to travel, and wanted to know why more women weren't traveling. So Olive went out and she rode over 40,000 miles, and she was making notes, talking to other passengers. What she discovered was the chairs were too high, so it wasn't comfortable for women. They ended up lowering the chairs, having a curved or arched back, so some lumbar support. She added plush materials with patterns and stain-resistant fabrics. She also added dimmable lighting in the rail car, so it wasn't always so glaring. Offered up complimentary toiletries in the changing areas and the bathrooms and such, and really started opening up something that was much more marketable for the women. But her greatest invention possibly was the Dennis ventilator, which we see over here to the right. So, back then there wasn't air conditioning. You had to travel with the windows open if you wanted fresh air. But if you can imagine, you're being in a car pulled behind a steam engine or a diesel, oil burning engine, it's going to have nasty stuff coming right back into your window. So she invented this ventilator that actually fit in the window, much like a window fitted air conditioner in a house would. And it actually kept the temperature comparable inside the car, kept the smoke, the ashes, and other vapors from coming into the car. And it was also a low profile, so it didn't impede your ability to look out and enjoy the scenery while you were traveling. So that paved the way for air-conditioned travel and passenger cars. Her next thing that she did was she was allowed to design a state-of-the-art luxury passenger train called the Cincinnatian. And it was the first post-war train that was there to service our nation's capital. So she's actually been quite beneficial for our comfort since the 20s. Next up, we have Bonnie Leake. She is the first female engineer for Union Pacific Railroad, and she hired out in 1966 as a clerk, and then later turned into a dispatcher for the crew members. So that's kind of a thing at the railroad. A lot of people hire out in one capacity and maneuver over into another department. So that's not so untypical. She was a single mom at the time and, struggling to make ends meet, as most single moms do, and was walking around the office one day and heard the men talking. So railroaders do this really crazy thing. We openly discuss our paychecks, like openly. We are union employees and we get paid a certain amount of money to go a certain amount of miles. So it's not a big secret. We just talk about what we made that day. So she hears the men talking about this, and she thinks, I need that. I'm a single mom and I can do it. Well, not only did she think that she could do it, she did. She went through the training program, which at the time was 6 months. She met all of the physical requirements. She, met all the challenges of being a railroader, which are long hours, being away from your families, which was really hard for her as a single mom, and was able to successfully become a railroad engineer at the age of 30. So that's pretty amazing. She was noted in her retirement party in 2007 for saying, if you think of yourself as an equal, you'll eventually be treated that way. And being a female on the railroad, I can say she's 1000% correct. Well, now we get to Edwina Curley Justice. Now, Bonnie Leake might have busted down that glass ceiling for women being on the railroad. Well, Edwina comes through and she really shatters it as she becomes the first Black female that worked for the Union Pacific Railroad. She was no stranger, though, being the first at anything. She was the only Black student in her elementary school in Omaha, Nebraska, so you can only imagine what that must have been like. She later graduated from high school and became a wireman for Western Electric for 8 years. So I had to look that up to find out a little bit more what a wireman is. And from what I can gather, she was an electrician and installed and repaired electrical system in homes, factories, and businesses. So she really wasn't a stranger to doing work that was non-typical for women either. While she was working as a wireman, she had put in an application for Union Pacific. She got a denial, and it flat out said because she was a woman. Well, this didn't turn her away. It didn't stop her. She had a friend that worked at UP, and they told her, well, they're hiring right now for some clerks if you'd like. And so she put her application in and got accepted that time, being one, she was 1 out of 5 Black women working for the company at that time. So again, she's already starting to move that glass ceiling. So while she was doing her duty, she was hired out as a traction clerk, actually. She was out on a locomotive one day, and the engineer was having to do a series of tests or whatever for her to check the things she was looking for. And she kind of made a off-the-cuff remark, like, well, it doesn't look that hard. And he just kind of gruffed at her, well, if you think it's so easy, why don't you do it? Well, she did. At 34 years old, Edwina became the first Black female engineer for the UP. And it wasn't an easy place to be a woman, much less a Black woman. While some people never could get past the name calling, most of her coworkers embraced her and said that she ran an engine as good as, if not better than, any man could. So it was a great honor for her to be in that position. At her retirement, she said she remembers when a teacher told me that I'd never be successful staring out to the window. Boy, was she wrong. So good for Curly. Now, finally, we get to come to one of my own ladies at BNSF, Katie Farmer. She's the first female CEO of a Class 1 railroad, which happens to be where I work. So we heard that Sarah Kidder was the first president of a railroad, but hers was a narrow gauge. Now, BNSF is considered to be a Class 1 railroad. So in order to be considered Class 1, you have to make more than $250 million a year. That can change every year, of course, and so the position can change as well. We usually run pretty neck and neck with the UP, who's first, who's second, just depends on the earnings report as that comes out. But according to the Ultimate Guide to Railroad Classes, I had to look it up, a website, BNSF is the largest Class 1 railroad, reporting $23.9 billion in revenue, covering 32,500 track miles and employing over 35,000 employees. So Katie has her hands full. She started out at the BN, which was the Burlington Northern, in 1992. This was pre-merger. They merged with the Santa Fe in 1995, becoming what we now know as the BNSF. So she hired out on the BN side and worked her way up through the company. She served in operational roles, marketing, finance, and was the executive vice president of operations. But in 2021, Katie made history, becoming the first female to hold the title of president and CEO of a Class 1 railroad in America. Many of you probably know that our railroad is also owned by Warren Buffett. He is noted as having said, BNSF is an iconic company, and this is a historic day. We look forward to Katie's leadership and more success. She possesses all of the qualities that make us excited about the future. And I mean, what a compliment to come from one of the most prolific men in our economic, business side of America. So I'm pretty excited that if Katie's degree in business administration that she earned from TCU can take her to the top of BNSF, I'm wondering where my degree will take me one day. So we'll see where that goes. Which brings me to my story. I'm a first generation railroader in my family. Here I am as a little girl. I never really was a typical girl. I always had Hot Wheels sets and different things. My first bicycle was black with a big neon green spider going down the side. Here I am at Christmas again with a Dukes of Hazzard car. And then I don't know, the foreshadowing of this picture here, I'm holding up a BN box car for my Hot Wheels train set. I guess that was a prophetic photograph. Who would have known? But right now, I hired out for BNSF in 2013. I really am not that different from Bonnie Leak. I heard about the money and I just figured I could go take a stab at it. But it really is something that suits my not typically girly personality. I don't mind getting dirty, and I don't mind learning things about machinery and things like that. It really kind of piqued my interest. So it wasn't a too out of the box for me to apply at the railroad. Right now, there are two people on the train. There's the engineer who runs the train or drives it, for lack of a better word. They're mostly in charge of train movement, forwards and backwards, and doing so safely so that the train stays together. That's really an oversimplification of what they do, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. Then there's my role as the conductor. And my job is pretty physical compared to theirs. They get to hang out in the conditions of the cab, which are usually a lot cooler and a lot drier than my conditions. But my job is to get the locomotives from one track and then put them in another track against a bunch of cars and hook those cars up, get up underneath them, hook the air brakes, the air hoses up, test the air brake system once I have it put together, and then take it to another city. In the meantime, I have to maintain the manifest paperwork, making sure that the train is in compliance with both or all BNSF rules, FRA requirements, and hazmat standards. I do all the communicating with the dispatchers, coordinating train movement with them, and work with my engineer on good places to stop if we need to, or if there's a slow order coming up, or things of that. And like I said before, if there's an incident at a crossing, typically it's my job to rush back and administer what aid that I can and to get things moving quickly in that sense. Our job is 24/7 on call. We miss family events. We're late to a lot of parties. We don't get to see a lot of holidays. We work in all sorts of weather, but you know what? It sounds kind of cruddy when I say it like that, but it's really my dream job. It's provided everything in my life for me. And I owe a great deal of gratitude to my job. But it is not a job that is for everybody. It's kind of a man eater in a sense. So it takes a certain kind of person to be able to come out and work on the railroad. Well, I hired out in Fort Worth, and when I got a word that Slayton was hurting for manpower, I signed up and came out on the railroad's dime to work at Slayton for a little while. I got to learn a whole lot. The terminal was very different than Fort Worth. In Fort Worth, we had carmen that would do our air tests for us. We had hostlers that would put our power on for us. So I was a little bit pampered, so to speak, in Fort Worth. And when I came to Slayton, it was a bit of a rude awakening to figure out I had to do all that by myself. So I had a lot of learning to do, but I really was enjoying it. And there were some guys that came with me from Fort Worth. And after a few days of working, we finally had a chance to meet up together for a beer. And I had told them, I feel like this is where I belong. And they laughed at me because I'm from Fort Worth. And their words were, who would leave Fort Worth for a podunk town? Well, I kept telling them it was something in my spirit pulling me here, but my belief system tells me it's not something. It was God leading me to this place, and I just had to have the faith and the courage to listen to what it was He was saying to me. And thank God that I did. Not only did I get to meet a whole group of people that have become like family to me, but I've also met my husband, and that is where the story takes us to the love train. So my husband and I worked together. So when we first started dating, we worked together often. Well, let me just start at the beginning of that. Our first date, you could even say, was 36 hours. We were on a train for 12 hours. We went to the away from home terminal, stayed the night, came back another 12 hours. So we really had some quality time to kind of get to know one another. And then we got to work quite a bit together as boyfriend and girlfriend, if you will. But then the day we got married, in 2016, he got a job offer in Fort Worth to go work as an engineer there. So we left and we never got to work together again. His seniority is vastly different than mine. It's far superior to mine. So we just never got to work together. Well, finally in 2020, when we came back to Slayton, we got called together for our first husband and wife trip on a train that's called the Lub Temple, which is the Lubbock originating terminal to the Temple final terminal. So it was the Lub Temple, which quickly changed over to the Love Temple. And then it just kind of migrated into the Love Train. And the dispatchers actually call us that over the radio. The train crews refer to us that over the radio. So it's nice. It's a very endearing thing for me. It's a very special thing. It's also my most difficult train because that's both of my paychecks on that train. And if we make one mistake, that's a very costly mistake for me. So that's my favorite, but my hardest train. So here we are. My son took this picture for us. We have this granite marker here at the Slayton Harvey House in front of the caboose. We are the first husband and wife train crew in Slayton. So that's really a special title that we get to share. And then my son, who's 24, just got accepted to be a conductor with BNSF Railroad and starts next month. So we're hopeful for his successful completion of that program. And we'll be a father-daughter or father-son and mother trio. And that's going to be, pretty special to us and maybe something significant. I don't know if there's many of those in the system or not, but that is the end of my story. Thank you so much for your time and your interest in this story of women and their impact on the railroad. Thank you to the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission for providing this platform. And I am so thankful that you joined me.
Thank you so much, Mandy. This was incredible. I've been reading the comments in the chat box, and folks are saying this is one of the best presentations they've attended. So this is,
oh wow.
And there are stories. I'll go through them in a minute, but there are stories people are sharing about their own connection with the railway, different kinds of connections. I did want to say that I am excited and I'm thrilled that we look forward to bringing the Slayton Harvey House into the family of the Texas Historical Commission historic sites. So it will be one of THC's historic sites. It will continue to operate as a B&B as far as I know. And so that is going to be exciting. And I think there were a couple of us chatting on the side saying we're really looking forward to visiting soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through the comments. Most of these are just personal stories people are sharing, so I'll go through them.
Okay.
quickly, we have people from Kansas also that have joined us.
Wow.
John, he's waving out.
Hello.
Uh, thank you so much for joining us. Let's see. I did drop the link to the Slayton Harvey house in the chat box. We will include that in the email
Excellent.
tomorrow as well.
Thank you very much.
So starting with Deborah shares that her mom's family were Cajuns from Southeast Louisiana, and all the men in her family either worked in the oil fields on the Southern Pacific Railroad. She says, my memories included riding the trains from the Houston area where I grew up to Lafayette, Louisiana. We ate lunch in the dining car with white tablecloths, eating hamburgers, etc. The other thing I remember, my grandmother was widowed just before World War II. She still had 5 to 6 children at home to support. She turned her home into a boarding house for railroad workers.
Oh,
As a
wow.
young child, I recall she still had 2 railroad men who boarded with her when they had layovers in town. To this day, when I see a freight train coming by or hear the train whistle at night, it brings a smile.
Oh, that's an excellent story.
I
Thank you
know,
for
that's one
your
more.
putting us up. That's excellent.
Raylin says, when I hear about a Harvey house, I think of the one in Williams, Arizona, near the Grand Canyon. On the train ride from the hotel to the canyon, we were robbed by bandits, and robbed in quotes, by bandits on horseback. Back in the
Wow.
day, how common was it for trains to be stopped out in the middle of nowhere and the passengers be robbed at gunpoint? That's her question.
I
Her
don't know.
robbery was an enjoyable part of the show, though.
I don't know the exact answer, the number answer, but I know it's an incredibly significant amount. As we said earlier with the fried chicken ladies, the trains they were going short distances ideally to go from one town to the other, but it could take a substantial amount of time to traverse that a little bit of space so you could, get to be hungry without the dining car. And one of the problems, whether it was mechanical breakdowns along the way, it was trains getting robbed. As far as back then, I don't have that information. I can tell you now, here on my territory, we are just now starting to see pirates. I know that's kind of a strange word, but that's what they are. I don't know if anybody saw the clips from Chicago the other day where people were looting a parked train and appeared to be carrying off, looked like flat screen TVs and such. 2 or 3 days ago, I was in Amarillo and passed a train that had about 10 cars that were opened up, that they were having to inspect. So pirates are certainly becoming a larger threat to our business, our safety as rail crews. So it's not just horseback, robbery. It's actually still going on today. So I wish I knew the answer to that. But that's a very good question.
Thank you. Deborah responded to your point about safety at the railroad crossings, and she mentions an employee of hers lost her father to a crash with a train some 18 months ago. So just underscoring your point about safety. Steve Hansen shared, when you were talking about Mary Coulter, he says that Mary Coulter designed the watchtower and 2 lodges at the Grand Canyon as well. So
yes. She did design a lot of the national park system, has a lot of her buildings in their system, and she is very well represented there in Arizona and along the Grand Canyon way. She's got her history is there for sure.
And then someone who's listed here as Mid-Coast TMN says they love the presentation that you've shared.
Thank you.
And they say, as a child, I went to work with my dad, who was a signalman in Iowa for the ICG. My first train ride was at 6 months old in 1961.
Oh, wow.
So I love trains and railroads. Hearing all this great information about the women who shaped the railroad in America is just thrilling. So they're thanking you.
Well, thank you.
Also, again, more compliments from Karen Archer. Dusty asked, wasn't Western Electric the manufacturer of Bell telephone and equipment? And Dusty, I was trying to Google, but then I saw Deborah's response, and it seems that you're correct. So it was all a very small sphere, I guess, during that time.
Right.
Deborah says, I still miss the railroad worker in the caboose, the memories of honking, waving to the caboose worker as the train passed by at the railroad stop. I know technology changes things, but some things are sad to lose. I agree.
They certainly are. As innovation takes over, more and more jobs become put on the line. My job is no different. The rail system is wanting to pursue one-man crews, one person running the entire train across behind your house. And that's incredibly terrifying to us. But I mean, that's what innovation does, right? We have self-checkout at Walmart now for that very same reason. The caboose was replaced with the little orange box that hangs off the rear end of the train called an ETD, end of train device. We call it FRED for short, which is like a flashing rear end device. And it communicates to the engineer on the head end the air pressure to make sure that our train is all together and that we're communicating well throughout the air brake system to the very last car. So if we need to stop for you at a crossing, we will do our best. And that little orange box helps us make sure that happens.
I did not know that that was the purpose of the caboose. So thank you for for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Nancy mentions that she now wants to visit the Slayton Harvey house. So you'll
You're
see,
welcome. Come on.
you'll see more traffic for sure.
That's excellent. We're good to hear. Glad to hear that.
More compliments from Ruth, from Melissa, Terry, Midcoast TMN, John, Sebastian. Thank you all so much. This has been really, really fun. Are there any other questions anyone has? Let's see. There might be a couple.
I just have to say, I see my friend Tony Privet. Hi, Tony. Thank you for joining.
Let's see. Marion Barber says, Mandy is a serious historian. I remember seeing cattle pens beside the railroad tracks between Tivoli and Refugio in South Texas with a ramp used to shepherd the cattle onto the train. I think they were already obsolete by the 1960s, but still standing.
Yes, yes. My closest that I've encountered with that was a few years ago in Fort Worth when Barnum and Bailey Circus was actually still a thing. They would come to Fort Worth Convention Center via train, and we would actually house the Barnum and Bailey train, the circus train, in a special designated set of tracks there in Fort Worth known as the circus tracks. And, it was a very strange and peculiar experience. We're taught about safety and then all of this. And at 2 a.m, you'd see a dude go by on a unicycle juggling on the middle of the rail line. It was very crazy, but it was the closest that I ever got to having seen animals on a train. But when the circus went away, so did that. So I'm glad I got to at least experience that for the crazy experience that it was.
Sebastian is sharing, another woman worth noting is Mary Meyer, one of the first women to work in an interlocking tower, Tower 17 in Rosenberg. She worked for the Southern Pacific and oversaw Southern Pacific, Santa Fe trains at that diamond through the BNSF and SP-UP mergers. She was a founding board member of our museum in Rosenberg, and we always loved telling her stories, one of which is she wielded a wooden baton at all times to deter any drunken men coming from a nearby bar. She asked her boss for a gun to defend herself and her co-workers, but she was given a baton.
Well, we're told the same thing. We're not allowed to carry weapons. We can carry a 3-inch blade. I think it's a nice idea in theory, but if I can get you with a blade, we're already too close. So it's kind of a bad deal. And you can get some surly people and transient people are pretty scary sometimes. I've walked up on a few, but I've been fortunate. But interesting about Miss Meyer, and that, like I said before, there are so many stories that I came across, again, thinking it was just going to be women filling absent men's roles during wars. And it was difficult to pick and choose which ones to be brought to the forefront. And every time I make this presentation, I try to mix it up a little bit, add a little here, take away a little there to try to bring some more of these women to the forefront each opportunity that I'm provided. So thank you for letting me know about Miss Meyer. Appreciate it.
Let's see. Patrick Foley is asking, do you know if more women worked on the railroads during World War II? Rosie the railroader?
I looked into that a long time ago, and I don't want to sound uneducated when I say this. I don't think I think she was more of a marketing thing, if I recall. I could be very wrong with that. So I don't really want to say much. But as far as more women, I'm right now the only actively working female in my terminal. We do have one, and she's actually the daughter of a railroader here, but she's out right now on leave. So right now I'm actively the only one working. In Amarillo, there's, maybe a dozen working, Fort Worth, probably 20 or so working. So they're definitely out there. We're just certainly the minority by a long shot. And I've always said, this is not a man's job. Here, I do it every single day, but it is certainly a man's world. And, it takes a special group of women to be able to exist and to thrive in that environment. So whenever I see one in a depot or whatever, there's just kind of that little secret, there you go, go girl kind of thing. So it's kind of nice.
That's awesome. Heidi's asking, do you know anything about the crossing guard that we still use today? And you mentioned that it's basically the same one that was invented originally, right?
I don't know if we do use like the crossing guard at like a school crossing guard or like at a
I think what they mean is the railroad
automated system.
crossing, the automated system.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, right now we have two different types of systems. One's an aggressive warning system, which is the one with the lights, the dinging, the gates that come down. There's also a passive warning system, which is just the crossbucks and a yield sign. That's the one we often see accidents at because people forget what yield means. And they just kind of dart across the crossing. The gates are an aggressive means to communicate that to you. So it's definitely a departure from what Miss Riggin first came up with, but by all intents and purposes, it's very much the same system that she invented. Did I answer that completely?
I think so. Yeah. And I think it's amazing that some of these things that were invented back then by these women are so integral to
Yes.
the work of railways and
Yes,
to railway safety, and we don't know anything about it. I certainly did not know anything about these things being invented by these women before today. So it's pretty amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's see. Someone who's listed as M says, I'm from Sarasota, Florida. John and Mabel Ringling's home, and this is John and Mabel Ringling's home and home to the circus. There's a big top and Nick Wallenda's high wire across the town. Working trains for circus animals, minus the elephants, go through I would say minus the elephants. You need a special train for the elephants. Go through regularly to transport for the traveling circus. So that must be fun to watch.
Wow, that would be exciting. I would like to be able to see that more often, but like I said, working in the switching yard, trying to switch safely, it was a little unnerving to see a drunk clown go riding by on a unicycle at 3 a.m. after he's performed all night at his circus.
Donna Adair says, by coincidence, I recently read a book about women working in the ship transport, ocean liners, the ocean liner industry in the early 20th century. The book is called Maiden Voyages. So sort of drawing a parallel to,
that's excellent.
rail.
A lot of the information I got came from a book by Chris Innes, and her book is titled Iron Women. So Maiden Voyage and Iron Women are, sound like a pretty good pairing to sit down and read.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, we a couple of years ago, we featured, and earlier this year, we featured at one of these virtual events a presentation about women Air Force pilots during World War II. So, it's kind of, there's so many areas that women pioneered, the work that they did, and it's not spoken about a whole lot. So thank you for sharing that. Dusty says there's a famous story about an underpowered circus train that got stuck in a steep hill on a steep hill in Colorado. They actually unloaded the elephants and had them push the train up to the summit.
Wow.
That's
not at all surprising to me. Not at all. Not in the least.
Good use of your cargo there.
Yeah. Well, I know we're powered by 4,500 horsepower. I don't know what it converts to an elephant power, but that's pretty interesting.
I know. Well, I think that's about the end of the comments. Any other questions anyone has, please feel free to come off mute and jump in if you'd like to ask a question directly. All right. Well, I'm guessing people are we're way past our time. So I just want to say thank you, Mandy. This has been fascinating. It's been such a great presentation. We really, really appreciate you sharing this with us. I already am getting ideas about bringing you into our Real Places conference for a session. I think yours would be the super hit session of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to help any way that I can.
And it's
absolutely.
a great bed and breakfast. It's a great bed and breakfast. We were just there.
Oh, really?
The Harvey House.
Yes.
Yeah, we stayed in the Hopi room, which is in the opposite corner from where your office is.
Yes, sir.
And it was wonderful. Carol was our overnight host, and
Perfect.
her dog had puppies, and it was fun. The paint, the woodwork, the fixtures, and all the photographs in there. People need to know it's not just a museum; it's someplace that they can go and spend the night.
And I think what's important too about the Harvey House is that every person that works here is a volunteer, whether it's an executive board or the volunteer board, and every one of these people have deep, deep connections to the railroad, their dads, their grandfathers, our office managers, father and son. All of us have such deep connections. So we operate it here with a lot of love and a lot of passion. And I appreciate your kind words. Thank you very, very much.
And people don't know that you had a group of people stand in front of bulldozers to keep the building from being destroyed when BNSF did not need it anymore. It's an amazing story. Amazing story.
Correct. That's correct.
And Mandy, my colleague Linda Henderson, who's also on this
Yes.
Zoom call.
Hi, Linda.
She says, I mentioned Real Places. She says she will be in a Real Places session, and she'll be reaching out. So Linda and I will connect. We may have the same idea. So
okay, excellent. Yeah, I spoke with Linda a few weeks ago, so that's exciting.
Wonderful. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you to you, Mandy, for taking your time to be with us, and thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Really appreciate your time, and we hope you had a good time tonight.
Yes.
And we'll see you again next month.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.